The crack of a gunshot split the hot Arizona air as Madeline Porter leaped from the moving stagecoach, her skirts billowing around her like a desperate parachute. The year was 1878, and she'd rather die from the fall than face what awaited her at the end of this journey. Pain shot through her ankle as she hit the dusty ground, tumbling and rolling down a small embankment before coming to rest in a cloud of dirt and broken dignity. The stagecoach continued on, the driver either unaware or unconcerned that he'd lost a passenger. Madeline attempted to stand, only to collapse back to the ground with a cry of pain. Her ankle throbbed mercilessly, and blood seeped through her torn stockings. The relentless summer sun beat down on her exposed face and neck, her bonnet having been lost in the fall. She glanced up at the empty road stretching endlessly in both directions. Not a soul in sight. Nothing but desert, rock formations, and scattered scrub brush for miles. "What have I done?" she whispered, the gravity of her impulsive decision washing over her. She'd escaped one fate only to face another dying alone in the desert. The distant sound of hoofbeats made her heart race. She squinted against the sun, making out the silhouette of a rider approaching from the west. For a moment she considered hiding, but there was nowhere to go. She was at the mercy of whoever was coming. The rider slowed as he approached, and Madeline could finally make out the figure of a man atop a chestnut quarter horse. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but she could see he was young, perhaps in his late 20s. He wore a faded blue shirt, dusty denims, and had a pistol holstered at his hip. "Madam." His voice carried a note of concern as he dismounted, approaching cautiously. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," Madeline admitted, attempting to maintain some semblance of dignity despite her disheveled appearance. "I fell from the stagecoach." The man knelt beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Fell or jumped?" His eyes, she noticed now, were a startling shade of green, intelligent and assessing. Madeline hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "Jumped." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Thought as much. Most folks don't fall out of stagecoaches moving at full tilt." He removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair. "Name's Quentin Ellis. I run cattle about 10 miles north of here." "Madeline Porter," she replied, wincing as she shifted her position. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her injured ankle. She nodded reluctantly, and he gently examined her ankle with surprising tenderness for hands so weathered by work. "It's not broken, but it's a bad sprain," he concluded. "You won't be walking on it anytime soon." He looked up at the empty road, then back at her. "Where were you headed, Miss Porter?" "Away," she answered simply. "Just away." Something in his expression told her he understood more than she'd said. He nodded once, decision made. "Well, we can't leave you out here." "My ranch is closer than town." He stood and adjusted his hat. "I'll carry you." Before Madeline could protest, Quentin bent down and carefully scooped her into his arms. She stiffened at the unfamiliar contact, but the security of his strong hold was undeniable. "I'll carry you," he repeated softly as he lifted her toward his horse. "Hold tight." With surprising grace, he managed to mount his horse while cradling her, settling her sideways across the saddle in front of him. One arm remained firmly around her waist while the other took the reins. The intimacy of the position made her cheeks flush, but there was nothing improper in his manner, only genuine concern. "Thank you," Madeline whispered, her voice nearly lost in the breeze as they began to ride. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Miss Porter," he replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Even those of us who'd rather die than admit it." The ride to Quentin's ranch took nearly an hour. Madeline found herself relaxing against his chest, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the security of his arm around her. They spoke little, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It gave her time to gather her scattered thoughts. The ranch came into view gradually, first a windmill on the horizon, then the outline of a modest but well-maintained house, barn, and several outbuildings. A small creek ran along one side of the property, with cottonwood trees providing welcome shade. It wasn't grand, but there was something honest about it that appealed to Madeline immediately. As they approached, a dog came bounding toward them, barking excitedly. "That's Rusty," Quentin explained. "He's loud but harmless, An older man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He paused when he saw Madeline. "Frank," Quentin called out as they drew closer. "We've got a guest. Would you mind fetching Mrs. Winters from the cookhouse?" The man nodded and headed toward one of the smaller buildings without question. "Mrs. Winters is our cook," Quentin explained as he carefully dismounted, still holding Madeline securely. "She'll help get you settled." He carried her into the house, which was simple but clean and well-ordered. He set her gently on a sofa in the main room. "This is your home?" Madeline asked, looking around at the modest furnishings. "It is," he replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "Built it myself, mostly. It's not fancy, but it serves its purpose." A stout woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun entered the room, her expression curious but kind. "Well now, what have we here?" "Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Madeline Porter. She had an accident with the Stagecoach and injured her ankle." "Miss Porter, this is Mrs. Winters, the best cook in the territory and the woman who keeps us all in line." Mrs. Winters approached, already assessing the situation with practiced eyes. "Let's have a look at that ankle, dear." As the older woman tended to her injury, Madeline found herself watching Quentin. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, giving instructions to Frank through the open door, fetching water when Mrs. Winters requested it. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. "You'll stay with us until that ankle heals," Mrs. Winters declared, wrapping a bandage around Madeline's swollen joint. "No sense in arguing about it." "I couldn't impose," Madeline began. "It's no imposition," Quentin interrupted gently. "We have a spare room and town's a half-day's ride. You're welcome here for as long as you need." Madeline hesitated, torn between gratitude and wariness. She'd learned the hard way that kindness often came with conditions. As if reading her thoughts, Quentin added, "No strings attached, Miss Porter, just neighbors helping neighbors, even temporary ones." Something in his earnest expression convinced her. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, I'm deeply grateful." "Good, that's settled then," Mrs. Winters announced, rising to her feet. "I'll make up the guest room. Quentin, you might want to send someone to fetch the doctor from town tomorrow just to be sure about that ankle." "Already planned to," he assured her. "I'll ride out myself first thing." As Mrs. Winters bustled off, Quentin pulled a chair closer to the sofa and sat down, removing his hat. "Now, Miss Porter," he said quietly, "I won't press you for details you don't want to share, but I should know if there's trouble following you." Madeline tensed. "Why would you think that?" "People don't usually jump from moving stagecoaches unless they're running from something worse than a broken neck." His gaze was direct but not unkind. "I've got men working for me who could be put at risk. I need to know what we might be facing." She looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "No one will come looking for me, at least not immediately. I was traveling to meet my fiancé." She nearly choked on the word. "In Tucson, a man I've never met, but my uncle arranged the marriage before he died." "I see," Quentin said, though his expression suggested he suspected there was more to the story. "My uncle was my only family," Madeline continued, finding it oddly easy to confide in this stranger. "When he passed last month, I discovered he'd arranged for me to marry a business associate, a Mr. Harlan Wheeler. The terms of his will stipulated that I would only receive my inheritance if I went through with the marriage." "And you chose to forfeit your inheritance rather than marry this Wheeler fellow," Quentin observed. "Must be a reason for that." Madeline's fingers tightened on the fabric of her skirt. "I received a letter from a woman in Tucson. She warned me about Mr. Wheeler's reputation. His previous wife died under suspicious circumstances. The woman who wrote to me believed he was responsible, though nothing was ever proven." Quentin's jaw tightened. "So you ran?" "Yes," she admitted. "I had a little money saved. I thought I could make it to California, perhaps find work as a teacher. But I panicked when we got closer to Tucson. I couldn't bear the thought of being handed over to that man." "You did the right thing," Quentin said firmly. "No one has the right to trade you like cattle." His blunt assessment made her smile despite everything. "My uncle would disagree. He always said a woman's highest purpose was to make an advantageous marriage." "With all due respect to your late uncle, that's horse manure," Quentin replied, the corner of his mouth quirking up. My mother ran this ranch for 10 years after my father died. She could outride, outshoot, and outthink most men I've known. Something warm unfurled in Madeline's chest at his words. She sounds remarkable. She was, he agreed, a shadow of grief passing over his features. We lost her to fever 3 years ago. I'm sorry, Madeline said softly. He nodded, accepting her sympathy without comment. Rest easy, Miss Porter, you're safe here. We'll figure out your next steps when you're healed. As he rose to leave, Madeline called after him, Mr. Ellis. He turned, one hand on the doorframe. Quentin, please. Quentin, she amended. Thank you, not just for the help, but for believing me. Something flickered in his green eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Sometimes trust is the most valuable thing we can offer each other, Miss Porter. Madeline, she corrected with a small smile. Madeline, he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect before stepping outside, leaving her to wonder at the strange turn her life had taken in just a few hours. Mrs. Winters returned shortly, helped her to the guest room, and assisted her in changing into a borrowed nightgown. The older woman was efficient but gentle, her weathered hands surprisingly comforting as she helped Madeline settle into the clean, if simple, bed. Mr. Ellis is a good man, Mrs. Winters said as she adjusted the pillows behind Madeline's back. One of the best I've known. His father was decent enough, but Quentin has his mother's heart, strong but kind. You've been with the family a long time, Madeline asked. Nearly 30 years, the older woman confirmed. Came out here as a young widow with my little boy. The Ellis family gave us a home when we had nowhere else to go. She smoothed the blanket with practiced hands. My son grew up here, worked the ranch until he married and got a place of his own over near Flagstaff. It seems like a good place, Madeline observed, feeling the tension of the day beginning to drain from her body, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion. It is, Mrs. Winters agreed. Now rest. Morning comes early on a ranch. As the door closed behind the older woman, Madeline gazed around the simple room. A patchwork quilt covered the bed, the stitches small and even. A ceramic wash basin sat on a chest of drawers beneath a small mirror. A rocking chair occupied one corner, and a colorful rag rug brightened the wooden floor. The window was open, allowing a cool evening breeze to drift in, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. For the first time since her uncle's death, Madeline felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. She knew her problems weren't solved. She was still penniless, still without a plan beyond fleeing, but for tonight, at least, she was safe. She fell asleep to the distant sound of cattle lowing and the gentle creak of the windmill turning in the night breeze. The next morning, Madeline awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the mouth-watering smell of coffee and bacon. She attempted to stand, wincing as weight fell on her injured ankle, but managed to hobble to the wash basin. She splashed water on her face and did her best to tidy her appearance, though her dress was still dusty and torn from yesterday's ordeal. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Winters' entrance. The older woman carried a tray laden with breakfast and a steaming cup of coffee. Thought you might be hungry, she said, setting the tray on a small table. And I've brought something else you might appreciate. She held up a simple calico dress. It belonged to Quentin's mother, should fit you well enough until we can mend your clothes. Oh, I couldn't possibly, Madeline began. Nonsense, Mrs. Winters interrupted. It's just gathering dust in a trunk. Sarah would have wanted it put to good use. With the older woman's help, Madeline changed into the borrowed dress. It was a bit loose in the waist, but otherwise fit reasonably well. The fabric was soft from many washings, the pattern a subtle blue and white check. There, Mrs. Winters said with satisfaction. Much better. Now eat your breakfast while it's hot. Quentin rode out at dawn to fetch the doctor. He didn't need to go himself, Madeline said, feeling a twinge of guilt. Mrs. Winters smiled knowingly. That's Quentin for you, never asks others to do what he can do himself. She headed for the door. Call if you need anything. Otherwise, I'll be back to check on you later. Left alone, Madeline ate the simple but delicious breakfast, savoring the rich coffee and fluffy biscuits with honey. When she finished, she managed to make her way to the rocking chair by the window, where she could look out over the ranch. The view was breathtaking in the morning light. The main house sat on a slight rise, overlooking pastures where cattle grazed contentedly. Beyond them stretched the rugged beauty of the Arizona landscape: red rocks, saguaro cacti, and in the far distance, mountains blue with haze. Men on horseback moved among the cattle, their shapes small against the vast backdrop. It was nothing like the tidy streets of St. Louis where she'd grown up, or the manicured garden behind her uncle's townhouse. There was something wild and honest about this place that spoke to something deep inside her, something she hadn't realized was there until now. She was still gazing out the window when hoofbeats announced riders approaching. Quentin returned, accompanied by an older man carrying a leather medical bag. They dismounted, and Quentin glanced up at the house, his eyes finding her at the window. He tipped his hat with a small smile that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Minutes later, the doctor was examining her ankle, his touch professional and impersonal as Quentin waited outside the room. A bad sprain, as Mr. Ellis suspected, the doctor confirmed, rewrapping the ankle. Keep weight off it for at least a week, then gradually begin walking on it. I'll leave some powders for the pain. Thank you, doctor, Madeline said. I appreciate you coming all this way. Not at all. Any friend of the Ellis family is worth the ride. He packed up his bag. You're in good hands here, Miss Porter. After the doctor left, Quentin knocked softly and entered the room. Doc says you'll live, he said with a slight smile. So I'm told, she replied. Thank you for bringing him. You've already done far more than I could ask. He waved off her thanks, leaning against the doorframe. It was no trouble. I had business in town anyway. His eyes took in the borrowed dress and something softened in his expression. My mother's dress suits you. Madeline smoothed the fabric self-consciously. Mrs. Winters insisted. I hope you don't mind. Not at all. Mom would have liked you, I think. He straightened. If you're feeling up to it, I thought you might prefer sitting on the porch rather than being cooped up in here all day. The view's better. I'd like that very much, Madeline admitted. Without further discussion, Quentin crossed the room and carefully lifted her into his arms. She found herself holding her breath at the sudden proximity, aware of his clean scent soap and leather, and something uniquely him. He carried her effortlessly through the house and out to a covered porch that wrapped around two sides of the building. He settled her in a comfortable rocking chair, ensuring her injured ankle was elevated on a stool, then draped a light blanket over her legs, although the day was warm. Comfortable? He asked. Very, she assured him. This is lovely, he nodded, seeming satisfied. I've got work to attend to, but Mrs. Winters will be around if you need anything. Please don't let me keep you from your responsibilities, Madeline said quickly. You've already been far too kind. Quentin studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. You know, most people in your situation would be making demands, not worrying about inconveniencing others. Madeline looked down. I've learned that kindness shouldn't be taken for granted. It's too rare a commodity. Maybe you've just been around the wrong people, he suggested quietly. Then, with a nod, he descended the porch steps and headed toward the barn, his long strides eating up the distance. The day passed peacefully. Madeline watched the activities of the ranch with interest, men moving cattle from one pasture to another, horses being exercised, supplies unloaded from a wagon. Mrs. Winters brought her lunch and sat with her for a while, sharing stories of the early days when the ranch was just getting established. Sarah Ellis, Quentin's mother, she was something special, the older woman reminisced. Came out here as a city girl, not knowing a thing about ranch life. By the time she passed, she could birth a calf, break a horse, and shoot a rattlesnake at 20 paces. You miss her, Madeline observed. Every day, Mrs. Winters confirmed. Quentin does too, though he doesn't talk about it much. Takes after his father that way, keeps his feelings close. As the afternoon waned, Quentin returned to the house, his shirt damp with sweat, dust coating his boots and pants. He stopped at the well to wash up before approaching the porch. How's the patient? He asked, climbing the steps. Much better for the fresh air, Madeline replied. Your ranch is beautiful. He looked out over the property, pride evident in his posture. It's been in the family for 2 generations. My grandfather settled here after the war, the Mexican-American one, not the more recent unpleasantness. You've expanded it, she guessed. He glanced at her, surprised. How did you know? The northern fence line looks newer than the rest, she explained. And the cattle in that pasture are a different breed. Quentin's eyebrows rose. You have a good eye. Yes, I purchased the adjacent property last year. Previous owner couldn't make a go of it. It was a smart investment, Madeline said. The creek access alone would be worth it. Now he looked genuinely surprised. You know something about ranching, she laughed softly. Not really, but my father was in banking before he died. He always said water rights were the most valuable asset in Western territories. Quentin settled into the chair beside her. Your father was a wise man. He studied her with new interest. What else did he teach you? To read a balance sheet, to calculate interest in my head. To never sign a contract I hadn't read thoroughly, she smiled sadly. He died when I was 12. My mother followed a year later. I went to live with my uncle after that. The same uncle who tried to marry you off to a man you'd never met, Quentin observed, a touch of anger in his voice. The very same, she confirmed. Uncle Harold believed a woman's education should be limited to household management and social graces. He was quite dismayed to discover I'd already learned arithmetic and literature. Heaven forbid a woman should be able to think for herself, Quentin said dryly. Madeline smiled at his sarcasm. Indeed, it might give her dangerous ideas like having opinions of her own. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, they fell into easy conversation. Quentin told her about the challenges of the past winter, which had been unusually harsh, and his plans for breeding a hardier strain of cattle. Madeline found herself drawn in by his obvious passion for his work and his deep connection to the land. When Mrs. Winters called them for supper, Quentin once again carried Madeline inside, setting her gently at the dining table. The meal was simple but hearty beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Frank joined them, as did two other ranch hands, Tom and Miguel. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and good-natured ribbing among the men. Madeline observed how Quentin interacted with his employees, respectful, attentive, genuinely interested in their opinions. They, in turn, clearly respected him, but there was an ease to their interactions that spoke of mutual regard rather than rigid hierarchy. After dinner, Quentin carried her back to her room, setting her carefully on the edge of the bed. Thank you for including me tonight, Madeline said. It was the most enjoyable evening I've had in a long time. I'm glad, he replied. It gets lonely out here sometimes. It's nice to have a new voice in the conversation. Standing this close, Madeline could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, evidence of long days in the sun, and the subtle variations of green in his irises. There was a small scar through his left eyebrow that she hadn't noticed before. Well, he said, stepping back, I should let you rest. Good night, Madeline. Good night, Quentin, she replied softly, watching as he closed the door behind him. As she prepared for bed, Madeline found herself thinking about the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. If she hadn't jumped from that stagecoach, if Quentin hadn't happened to be riding by, she shivered at the thought of what might have been. For the first time since receiving the letter about Harlan Wheeler, Madeline felt something other than fear when she thought about the future. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but perhaps its distant cousin, possibility. The days fell into a gentle rhythm. Each morning, Madeline woke to breakfast delivered by Mrs. Winters. Then Quentin would carry her to the porch where she could watch the ranch activities and enjoy the fresh air. Sometimes he would join her for lunch, sometimes not, depending on the demands of the day. In the evenings, they would share dinner with the ranch hands, followed by conversation on the porch if the weather was fine, or in the cozy sitting room if it was not. By the end of the week, Madeline was able to put some weight on her ankle, though Quentin still insisted on carrying her down the stairs and back up again at night. She found herself looking forward to those moments, brief as they were, when his arms held her securely against his chest. As her mobility improved, Madeline began helping Mrs. Winters with small tasks around the house, mending clothes, shelling peas, kneading bread dough. The older woman was a patient teacher, and Madeline found satisfaction in the simple domestic work that had been considered beneath her in her uncle's household, where servants handled such tasks. You've got a natural touch with pastry, Mrs. Winters observed one afternoon as they worked side by side in the kitchen. Most folks handle it too much, makes it tough. My mother taught me when I was small, Madeline explained, before she became ill. We used to bake together on Sunday afternoons. It's good to have those memories, Mrs. Winters said gently. Keeps them with you in a way. Madeline nodded, throat tight with unexpected emotion. Yes, it does. That evening, when Quentin tasted the apple tart she'd made for dessert, his eyes widened in appreciation. This is incredible, he declared, taking another bite. Did you make this? Madeline has a gift with pastry, Mrs. Winters answered before she could respond. Better than mine, and I don't say that lightly. It's just a simple tart, Madeline demurred, though pleasure warmed her at the genuine appreciation in Quentin's expression. There's nothing simple about perfect pastry, he countered. Trust me, I've eaten enough leathery crusts to know the difference. His compliment stayed with her long after the meal was over, a small spark of pride that she hadn't felt in years. The next day, Quentin found her on the porch, her mending basket beside her. He had a thoughtful expression on his face as he settled into the chair next to hers. I've been thinking, he began, then paused, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. A dangerous pastime, Madeline teased gently. He smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. So I've been told. But hear me out. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Your ankle's healing well. In another week or so, you'll be fully mobile. Madeline nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. Of course, he was going to ask about her plans. She'd known this conversation was coming, had been avoiding thinking about it. Yes, thanks to your care. What I'm wondering is, what then? His green eyes searched her face. Where will you go? She set her mending aside, hands folding in her lap. I'm not entirely sure, she admitted. My original plan was California, but that was when I had my savings. Most of that was in my luggage on the Stagecoach. Quentin frowned. You should have said something. I could have sent someone to track down your belongings. It's been over a week, Madeline pointed out. And I'm not even certain which stage line it was. I was not thinking clearly when I purchased the ticket. He nodded, accepting this. Understandable, but that still leaves the question of what comes next for you. Madeline looked out over the ranch, unwilling to meet his gaze. I was thinking of asking in town about employment, perhaps as a shop girl or a teacher if they need one. You could stay here, Quentin said quietly, her head snapped up, eyes wide. What? Mrs. Winters isn't getting any younger, he continued, his tone carefully neutral. She could use help with the household, and you've already proven yourself capable. You're offering me a position as a housekeeper, Madeline clarified, unsure whether to feel relieved or disappointed. More of an assistant to Mrs. Winters, he amended. With full room and board, of course, and a fair wage. It was a generous offer, especially to a woman with no references and few alternatives. Yet something in Madeline rebelled at the idea of being an employee in this house where she'd begun to feel like, what? A guest, a friend. Seeing her hesitation, Quentin added, You don't have to decide right away, just think about it. I will, she promised. And thank you for considering me, he nodded, rising to his feet. I need to check on a sick calf, we'll talk more later. As he walked away, Madeline found herself watching the confident set of his shoulders, the easy grace of his movements. In just over a week, he had become important to her in ways she wasn't ready to examine too closely. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay awake, weighing her options. Quentin's offer was practical and kind. She would have security, a roof over her head, and work that wasn't demeaning. Many women in her position would consider it a godsend, yet something held her back from accepting immediately. Perhaps it was pride, or perhaps it was the growing awareness that her feelings for Quentin Ellis were becoming complicated. The thought of being his employee, of maintaining a professional distance, made her heart ache in ways she hadn't anticipated. But what was the alternative? To leave to try her luck in a town where she knew no one. The prospect was daunting. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Madeline, are you awake? Quentin's voice was low, concerned. She sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. Yes, come in. The door opened and Quentin stepped inside, a lamp in his hand casting golden light across the room. He was still fully dressed despite the late hour. I saw the light under your door, he explained. Wanted to make sure you were all right. Just thinking, she assured him. Is everything okay with the sick calf? Touch and go, he admitted, setting the lamp on the dresser. I've been checking on him every hour. In the soft lamplight, with his hair tousled and fatigue evident in the set of his shoulders, he looked more vulnerable than she'd seen him before. More human. About your offer, Madeline began hesitantly. You don't need to decide now, he interrupted gently. I know, but… She took a deep breath. I'm grateful, truly, but I'm not sure it's the right arrangement. Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment perhaps. I understand. You have other plans. No, that's not it, she said quickly. It's just, I've spent most of my life dependent on the goodwill of others. My uncle made it clear daily that his roof over my head was charity, not family obligation. This wouldn't be charity, Quentin assured her. You'd be earning your keep. I know, she acknowledged, and that's important to me, but… She struggled to find the right words. But, he prompted when she fell silent. Madeline looked directly at him, gathering her courage. But I've come to value our friendship. I worry that an employer-employee relationship would change that. Quentin's expression softened. Is that what's troubling you? He moved closer, sitting on the edge of the rocking chair near her bed. Madeline, I value our friendship too. That wouldn't change, wouldn't it? She challenged gently. There would always be that imbalance between us. He ran a hand through his hair, considering her words. I see your point. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, What would you propose instead? The question caught her off guard. She hadn't expected him to ask for alternatives. I'm not sure, she admitted. I just know I need to stand on my own 2 feet somehow. Quentin studied her face in the lamplight, his expression thoughtful. What if? He began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider. What if what? She encouraged. What if you were a partner, not an employee? He suggested. Mrs. Winters has been talking about starting a small side business, preserves and baked goods to sell in town. Your pastry skills could be valuable there. You could share in the profits, not just earn a wage. Madeline considered the idea, a small spark of excitement kindling. That could work. I'd still be contributing, but as a partner rather than a dependent. Exactly, Quentin said, warming to the concept. And if it goes well, perhaps you could even expand into other areas. I've been thinking the ranch could benefit from diversification. Like what? Madeline asked, intrigued. Well, we've got more eggs than we can use since I expanded the chicken coop, he explained, and the orchard produces more fruit than we can eat. There's potential there, if someone had the inclination to develop it. The possibilities unfolded in Madeline's mind, not just preserves, but perhaps a small shop in town, selling ranch products. It was an exciting prospect, one that would allow her to build something of her own while still being connected to this place that had already begun to feel like home. I like that idea, she said softly. Very much. The smile that broke across Quentin's face made her heart skip. Good. We can talk more about the details tomorrow. He rose, retrieving his lamp. Try to get some sleep now. You too, she replied. And thank you, Quentin, not just for the opportunity, but for understanding. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. You're an exceptional woman, Madeline Porter. I'm starting to think that stagecoach tossing you into my path was the luckiest accident of my life. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her with a flutter in her chest and a new hope for the future she hadn't dared imagine a week ago. The next morning, Mrs. Winters was delighted with the proposal. I've been wanting to do something with all that excess fruit for years, she exclaimed as they discussed the idea over coffee. And with your pastry skills, we could make a real go of it. You really think so? Madeline asked, still somewhat hesitant. Absolutely, the older woman assured her. The mercantile in town is always looking for local goods to stock, and when the railroad spur is completed next year, we could even ship to larger markets. Quentin, listening from the doorway, added, I was thinking we could convert the small storeroom off the kitchen into a proper workspace. Put in some shelves, maybe a second stove. The casual we in his statement warmed Madeline in unexpected ways. He was already thinking of this as a joint venture, including her in the future of the ranch. Over the next few days, plans took shape. Quentin ordered supplies to renovate the storeroom, while Madeline and Mrs. Winters experimented with recipes, testing different preserves and baked goods to determine which would travel and store best. Madeline's ankle continued to improve, and soon she was able to move about without assistance, though Quentin still hovered protectively whenever she navigated the stairs. Their evenings often found them on the porch, discussing ideas for the new business venture, their conversations flowing easily from practical matters to more personal topics. "Did you always want to be a rancher?" Madeline asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the western sky in dramatic oranges and pinks. Quentin considered the question. "I never really considered anything else," he admitted. "This land, these animals, they've been my whole life. My father started teaching me the business when I was knee-high to a grasshopper. You never wanted to see other places, do other things. I went to school in Denver for 2 years," he said. "Studied modern agricultural methods, business management, but I was always planning to come back." He glanced at her. "What about you? Did you have dreams before your uncle tried to marry you off?" Madeline smiled wistfully. "I wanted to be a teacher. I love books, love learning. The idea of sharing that with children appealed to me." "You still could, you know," Quentin said. "The school in town is always short-handed. Perhaps someday," she acknowledged. "But for now, I'm excited about our preserves business. It feels like building something that's mine." "Ours," he corrected gently. "You're not in this alone, Madeline." The way he looked at her when he said it made her wonder if he was still talking about preserves. As weeks passed, Madeline became more integrated into ranch life. She learned the names and personalities of the hands, helped with the vegetable garden Mrs. Winters maintained, and even tried her hand at riding once her ankle was fully healed. Quentin was a patient teacher, selecting a gentle mare for her and showing her how to sit properly in the saddle. "You're a natural," he praised as she guided the horse around the corral. "Most city folks are too tense their first time." "I'm still plenty tense," Madeline admitted with a laugh. "I'm just hiding it well." "Could have fooled me," he replied, his admiration evident. The renovations to the storeroom were completed by early September, transforming it into a bright, efficient workspace with ample storage for their products. The first batch of preserves peach, apple, and blackberry was ready to take to town, along with several dozen jars of honey from the hives at the edge of the property. "I think we should call it Porter's Preserves," Quentin suggested as they labeled the jars. "Why my name?" Madeline asked, surprised. "It has a nice ring to it," he replied with a shrug. "Ellis Preserves doesn't flow as well," Mrs. Winters, overhearing, snorted. "It's because he wants to see your name on things around here, girl. Men aren't subtle creatures, even the good ones." Quentin's ears reddened, but he didn't contradict the older woman. Madeline felt a blush rise to her own cheeks, but a small thrill ran through her at the implication. The following day, Quentin drove Madeline into town to meet with Mr. Barnes, the owner of the mercantile. It was her first trip away from the ranch since her arrival, and she found herself both excited and strangely nervous about leaving, even temporarily. The town of Cottonwood Springs was small but prosperous, with a main street lined with businesses: the mercantile, a hotel, a bank, the sheriff's office, a saloon, and various other establishments. People nodded greetings to Quentin as they passed, looking curiously at Madeline. "Small towns," Quentin murmured as they tied up the wagon in front of the mercantile. "Everyone's wondering who you are." "What will you tell them?" Madeline asked, suddenly conscious of her position. A single woman living at a bachelor's ranch, even with Mrs. Winters as chaperone, could be cause for gossip. "The truth," Quentin replied simply. "That you're my business partner and a friend of the family." Inside the mercantile, Mr. Barnes, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, greeted Quentin warmly. "Ellis, good to see you. And who's this lovely lady?" "Jeremiah, this is Miss Madeline Porter, recently of St. Louis. She's partnering with Mrs. Winters on a new venture." Madeline, Jeremiah Barnes, owner of the finest mercantile this side of Tucson. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Barnes," Madeline said, extending her hand. "Likewise, Miss Porter. Any friend of Ellis here is welcome in my establishment." His eyes twinkled. "Now, what's this venture I hear about?" Madeline explained their preserves business, showing him samples of their products. Mr. Barnes was enthusiastic, examining the jars with an expert eye. "Quality goods, no doubt about it," he declared. "I'll take your entire first batch on consignment." If they sell well, and I've no doubt they will, we can discuss a regular arrangement. As they concluded their business, a tall, elegantly dressed man entered the store, his gaze immediately fixing on Madeline. Something about his scrutiny made her uneasy. "Ah, Mr. Wheeler," Barnes greeted him. "What can I do for you today?" Madeline froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Wheeler, it couldn't be. Just picking up that order of cigars," the man replied, his eyes still on Madeline. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure, miss." Before she could respond, Quentin stepped slightly in front of her, a subtle but protective gesture. "Harlan Wheeler, this is Miss Porter. She's associated with my ranch." "Charmed," Wheeler said, extending his hand. "I've recently moved to the area from Tucson, purchased the old Davidson place." Madeline forced herself to take his hand briefly, fighting to keep her expression neutral. "Mr. Wheeler, have we met before?" he asked, his gaze uncomfortably penetrating. "You seem familiar." "I don't believe so," Madeline managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm new to the territory." "Ah, that explains it then." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome to Arizona, Miss Porter." As soon as Wheeler turned away to conduct his business, Quentin guided Madeline outside, his hand firm at the small of her back. "That's him, isn't it?" he asked quietly once they were beside the wagon. "The man your uncle arranged for you to marry." Madeline nodded, feeling ill. "Yes, I never met him before, but I've seen a photograph. What is he doing here?" "I don't know," Quentin admitted, his expression grim, "but I don't like it." He helped her into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. "Let's get back to the ranch. We need to figure out what this means." The ride back was tense, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived at the ranch, Quentin immediately called Frank over, speaking to him in low tones. The older man nodded and rode off toward town. "I've asked Frank to make some inquiries," Quentin explained as he helped Madeline down from the wagon. "Find out when Wheeler arrived and what his business is here." "He said he purchased property," Madeline said, still shaken by the encounter. "The Davidson place has been for sale for years," Quentin replied, guiding her toward the house. "No one wanted it because the water rights are disputed. It's odd that someone from Tucson would buy its sight unseen." Inside, Madeline sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "Do you think he followed me?" Quentin paced the room, his brow furrowed. "It's possible. If he invested a lot in this arrangement with your uncle, he might not be willing to let it go so easily." "But how would he know where I am?" Madeline asked. "I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't even know myself when I jumped from that stagecoach. Someone might have seen me pick you up," Quentin reasoned. "Or noticed a woman matching your description staying at the ranch. In small communities, word travels. What should we do?" Madeline whispered, fear coiling in her stomach. Quentin knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "First, we don't panic. Wheeler may not know for certain that you're the woman he was supposed to marry, and even if he does, he has no legal claim on you. The arrangement was between him and your uncle, who is now deceased. But my inheritance is not worth your freedom or safety," Quentin interrupted firmly. "Besides, we're building something here, aren't we? Something that could support you independently." Madeline squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his confidence. "Yes, we are. Then we continue as planned," he decided. "But we'll be cautious. You shouldn't go to town alone, at least not until we know more about Wheeler's intentions." Over the next few days, Frank returned with information that did little to ease their concerns. Harlan Wheeler had indeed purchased the Davidson property 3 weeks earlier, paying cash. He'd brought a small staff with him from Tucson and had been making inquiries about local businesses and residents. "He asked specifically about you, boss," Frank reported. "Wanted to know if you had any female relatives or visitors staying at the ranch." Quentin's jaw tightened. "What did people tell him?" "Mixed reports, from what I gather. Some folks mentioned a new lady at the Ellis place, others kept their mouths shut." Frank glanced at Madeline apologetically. "Word gets around, madam. It's not your fault, Frank," she assured him. "I appreciate you finding this out." After Frank left, Quentin stood at the window, his posture tense. "I don't like this. Wheeler's too interested in you for it to be coincidence." "What can he do, though?" Madeline asked. "As you said, he has no legal claim on me." "Men like Wheeler often think they're above the law," Quentin replied grimly. "And they have ways of getting what they want that don't always involve legal channels." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air between them. That night, Madeline struggled to sleep, her mind replaying the encounter with Wheeler, imagining what might happen if he confirmed her identity. Would he try to force her to honor the arrangement? Could he somehow lay claim to her inheritance without her cooperation? A soft tap at her window startled her from her dark thoughts. She sat up, heart racing, then relaxed when she saw Quentin's face peering in. She hurried to unlatch the window. "What are you doing?" she whispered as he crouched on the small roof outside her window. "Checking the perimeter," he replied in equally hushed tones. "I've got the men taking shifts watching the property tonight. You think Wheeler might come here?" Alarm shot through her. "I think it's better to be cautious," Quentin said. "I didn't mean to frighten you. Just wanted to let you know we're keeping an eye out." The moonlight caught in his hair, silvering the brown strands. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Madeline found herself smiling at the absurdity of their position him half through her window like a courting youth, her in her nightgown with her hair loose around her shoulders. "What?" he asked, noting her expression. "This is highly improper, Mr. Ellis," she teased gently, trying to lighten the mood. A slow smile spread across his face. "I suppose it is, Miss Porter, quite scandalous." "The town gossips would have a field day," she agreed. "Let them talk," he said softly, his expression growing serious. "Madeline, I want you to know something." "What is it?" she asked, her pulse quickening at his tone. "I won't let anything happen to you," he promised. "Not Wheeler, not anyone. You're safe here." The fierce protectiveness in his voice moved her deeply. "I know," she whispered. "I trust you, Quentin." Something shifted in his gaze, a heat that had nothing to do with danger or fear. For a breathless moment, Madeline thought he might lean forward, might cross the narrow space between them. Instead, he pulled back slightly. "I should continue my rounds," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Lock the window after me. Be careful," she urged as he prepared to climb back down. "Always am," he assured her with a quick smile before disappearing into the darkness. Madeline secured the window, then leaned against it, her heart racing with emotions that had nothing to do with fear of Harlan Wheeler. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the ranch. Madeline was in the kitchen with Mrs. Winters when one of the hands, Miguel, came to the door. "Sheriff's here to see Mr. Ellis," he announced. "Says it's important." Quentin, who had been checking the ledgers at the dining table, rose immediately. "Show him in, Miguel." Sheriff Thomas Davis was a tall, lean man with a weathered face and shrewd eyes that missed little. He removed his hat as he entered, nodding to the women. "Morning, Quentin, ladies." His gaze lingered on Madeline with curiosity. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Tom," Quentin replied, gesturing to a chair. "Coffee, wouldn't say no." The sheriff settled at the table, accepting the cup Mrs. Winters poured for him. "I'm here on official business, I'm afraid." "Oh," Quentin's expression remained neutral, but Madeline saw his shoulders tense. "Got a complaint from Harlan Wheeler," Davis explained, glancing again at Madeline. "Says you're harboring his fiancée against her will." A stunned silence fell over the kitchen. Madeline felt the blood drain from her face. "That's a serious accusation," Quentin said carefully, "and completely false." The sheriff nodded, unsurprised, figured as much. "But I have to investigate any formal complaint." He turned to Madeline. "I take it you're the lady in question." "Miss Porter." "I am Madeline Porter," she confirmed, stepping forward. "But I am not Mr. Wheeler's fiancée, nor have I ever been." "Wheeler claims there was an arrangement between him and your late uncle," Davis said. "Says you're set to inherit a considerable sum, contingent on the marriage taking place." "My uncle did make such an arrangement," Madeline acknowledged, "but I never agreed to it. I am of legal age and not bound by my uncle's wishes in this matter." The sheriff studied her face, then nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. The law doesn't allow for forced marriages, no matter what arrangements were made by others." He took a sip of his coffee. "Still, Wheeler seems determined. He's hired some rough characters, recently men with reputations. I'd advise caution." "We've been keeping watch," Quentin assured him, "but I appreciate the warning." "There's more," Davis said grimly. "I did some checking after Wheeler filed his complaint. Turns out his previous wife didn't die of fever as he claimed. There was an investigation, though nothing was ever proven." Madeline inhaled sharply. "The letter I received," It warned me about his wife's death. Wheeler has powerful friends in Tucson, the sheriff continued. But he's in my jurisdiction now, and I don't take kindly to men who threaten women. He finished his coffee and stood. I'll make it clear to him that any action against Miss Porter would be ill-advised, but keep your eyes open, Quentin. Men like Wheeler don't give up easily when money's involved. After the sheriff left, Quentin turned to Madeline, his expression troubled. This changes things. Wheeler knows you're here, and he's not going to let this go. What should we do? Madeline asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Quentin paced the room, thinking. We could send you somewhere else, Denver, perhaps, or San Francisco. Somewhere Wheeler couldn't find you easily. The thought of leaving the ranch, leaving Quentin, made Madeline's chest tighten painfully. I don't want to run, she said firmly. This is my home now. I have a business, partners, a life here. It's not safe, Quentin argued, concern etched in his features. Nowhere is completely safe, she countered. And I refuse to let Harlan Wheeler dictate my life any more than my uncle did. Mrs. Winters, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. The girl's right, Quentin. Running solves nothing. Besides, you've got a dozen good men here who'd stand with you against trouble. Quentin looked between the two women, his expression softening. You're both braver than is good for you, he said with reluctant admiration. All right. We stay and face this, but we take precautions. Those precautions became immediately apparent. Quentin doubled the night watch, made sure Madeline was never alone when outside the house, and always had someone ride along when deliveries were made to town. Despite the shadow of Wheeler's threat, the preserve's business flourished. Mr. Barnes sold out of their first batch within days and eagerly ordered more. Word spread, and soon they were receiving orders from neighboring towns as well. Madeline found herself busier than she'd ever been, rising early to help with baking, spending afternoons putting up preserves, and evenings planning new products with Mrs. Winters. The work was satisfying, the sense of accomplishment when she saw their labeled jars on the mercantile shelves immeasurable. Throughout it all, her friendship with Quentin deepened. They still found time for their evening conversations on the porch, discussing everything from books they'd read to dreams for the future. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. What remained unspoken between them was the growing attraction that simmered beneath their interactions. Madeline caught Quentin watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his gaze warm with something more than friendship. For her part, she found herself increasingly aware of him, the strength in his hands, the curve of his smile, the way sunlight caught in his hair. But neither of them broached the subject directly. Perhaps it was the looming threat of Wheeler, or perhaps it was simple caution, the fear of risking a friendship that had become precious to them both. October brought cooler temperatures and preparations for winter. The ranch hands were busy bringing in the last hay crop, repairing fences and buildings before the weather turned. Madeline and Mrs. Winters worked on their most ambitious order yet holiday gift baskets for the hotel in Phoenix, containing preserves, honey, and baked goods. It was during this busy time that Harlan Wheeler made his move. Madeline was alone in the preserves workshop, finishing a batch of apple butter when she heard a noise at the door. Expecting Mrs. Winters or one of the hands, she called out, "I'll be done in just a minute." "Take your time, Miss Porter, or should I say my dear fiancé?" Madeline whirled around, nearly dropping the jar in her hands. Harlan Wheeler stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his expression coldly triumphant. Behind him loomed two rough-looking men. "How did you get in here?" she demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady as she set the jar down carefully. "Your Mr. Ellis and his men are quite occupied with a small fire at the north boundary," Wheeler replied smoothly. "A convenient distraction, wouldn't you agree?" Cold fear washed over Madeline. "What do you want?" "What's rightfully mine," Wheeler said, stepping into the room. "You, my dear, and the considerable fortune that comes with you." "I am not yours," Madeline replied, straightening her spine, "and I never will be." Wheeler's false pleasantness vanished, his face hardening. "You have no choice in the matter. The terms of your uncle's will are quite clear. The inheritance passes to me if you refuse to honor the arrangement." This was news to Madeline. "That's not possible." My uncle wouldn't. Your uncle was heavily in debt to me, Wheeler interrupted. The marriage arrangement was his way of settling those debts. He added a codicil to his will ensuring I'd be compensated one way or another. Madeline's mind raced. Could it be true? Had her uncle truly bound her so completely? Even if what you say is true, she said, I still won't marry you. Then you'll leave me no choice but to collect my due through other means, Wheeler threatened, starting with this charming little business you've built. I believe I could make a case for it being developed with resources rightfully mine. One of the men behind Wheeler shifted impatiently. Can we get on with this, boss? That fire won't keep them busy forever. Indeed, Wheeler gestured to the men. Restrain her, we're leaving. As the men moved forward, Madeline grabbed the pot of boiling apple butter and flung it at them. The men yelled in pain as the scalding mixture hit them, buying Madeline precious seconds to dash for the door. She ran toward the main house, screaming for help, but Wheeler recovered quickly. He caught her just as she reached the porch steps, his grip bruisingly tight on her arm. You'll regret that, my dear, he hissed, dragging her toward a waiting carriage. Let her go, Wheeler. The quiet command cut through the air like a gunshot. Quentin stood at the corner of the house, rifle aimed steadily at Wheeler's chest. His face was smudged with soot, his clothes singed. He'd clearly ridden hard from the fire. This doesn't concern you, Ellis, Wheeler snarled, not releasing his grip on Madeline. The woman you're manhandling is my partner and under my protection, Quentin replied, his voice deadly calm. That makes it very much my concern. Wheeler's men had recovered enough to draw their weapons, creating a standoff. Madeline could feel Wheeler's fingers digging into her arm, but she refused to show fear. The law is on my side, Wheeler insisted. The terms of Harold Porter's will mean nothing if they involve forcing a woman into marriage, Quentin interrupted. Sheriff Davis was quite clear on that point. Wheeler's face contorted with rage. I won't leave empty-handed. One way or another, I'll have what's mine. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Wheeler. Mrs. Winter's voice came from the porch where she stood with a loaded shotgun. From the barn emerged Frank and Miguel, both armed. The odds had shifted dramatically. I suggest you release Miss Porter and leave our property, Quentin said evenly. Now. For a tense moment, Wheeler hesitated, clearly calculating his chances. Then, with a snarl of frustration, he shoved Madeline away from him. She stumbled but managed to stay upright, immediately moving toward Quentin. This isn't over, Wheeler warned as he backed toward his carriage. The courts will hear about this. They certainly will, Quentin agreed. Along with the evidence Sheriff Davis has been collecting about your wife's suspicious death, and the attempted kidnapping you just committed. Something ugly flashed in Wheeler's eyes, but he said nothing more as he and his men climbed into the carriage and drove away. As soon as they were out of sight, Quentin lowered his rifle and turned to Madeline. Are you hurt? Just bruised, she assured him, though she was trembling from the confrontation. How did you know to come back? Frank realized the fire was a diversion, Quentin explained, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Small, contained, too convenient. I rode back immediately. Thank God you did, Madeline whispered. Without warning, Quentin pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. I thought I might lose you, he murmured into her hair, when I saw him dragging you. Madeline clutched the front of his shirt, inhaling his familiar scent, feeling the rapid beat of his heart matching her own. I was so frightened, she admitted, not of him, but of being taken away from here. From you? Quentin drew back slightly, looking down at her with an expression that made her breath catch. Madeline, he began, his voice rough with emotion. Hate to interrupt, Frank called from the yard, but we should alert the sheriff about what happened here. Quentin nodded, reluctantly releasing Madeline, though he kept one hand at the small of her back. You're right. Wheeler won't give up easily. We need to be prepared. Sheriff Davis arrived within hours, taking statements from everyone about Wheeler's attack. He was grim-faced but not surprised. Wheeler's the type who thinks money puts him above the law, he observed. But attempted kidnapping is a serious charge. I'll have my deputies bring him in. But when the deputies reached Wheeler's property, they found it deserted. He and his men had fled, leaving no trace of their destination. Could be headed back to Tucson, the sheriff speculated when he reported this news. Or further afield. I've sent telegrams to neighboring jurisdictions, but Wheeler has resources. He could go to ground anywhere. The knowledge that Wheeler was still at large cast a shadow over the ranch. Quentin insisted on even stricter security measures, and Madeline was never left alone, even for a moment. A week after Wheeler's attack, a letter arrived from a law firm in St. Louis, addressed to Madeline. With trembling fingers, she opened it, Quentin at her side. "It's about my uncle's will," she said as she scanned the contents. "The lawyer says. He says Wheeler was telling the truth about the codicil. If I don't marry him, my inheritance goes to him to satisfy my uncle's debts." "Your uncle had no right to use you as a bargaining chip," Quentin said, anger evident in his voice. "No, he didn't," Madeline agreed, continuing to read. "But there's more. The lawyer says Wheeler had been pressing my uncle for payment for months. The marriage arrangement was a desperate attempt to satisfy the debt without losing everything." "What kind of debt could be so significant?" Quentin wondered. "Gambling, mostly," Madeline explained, looking up from the letter. "Apparently my uncle had a weakness for cards and horses. He lost heavily to Wheeler over several years. And used you to settle his accounts," Quentin said bitterly. "That's despicable." Madeline folded the letter carefully. "It doesn't matter now. I never wanted his money. I've built something here that means more to me than any inheritance." Quentin took her hands in his. "You're an extraordinary woman, Madeline Porter." The warmth in his eyes made her heart race. "Quentin," a shout from outside interrupted her. Rider coming, fast, they hurried to the porch, where Frank was pointing toward a cloud of dust on the horizon. As the rider drew closer, they could see it was one of the sheriff's deputies. "Wheeler's been found," the young deputy announced as he reined in his horse. "In the bottom of a ravine about 5 miles from his property, him and his men, dead." Quentin asked, his arm instinctively going around Madeline's shoulders. The deputy nodded grimly. "Looks like their carriage went off the edge in the dark. Sheriff thinks they were trying to leave the territory in a hurry." Madeline felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the threat was over, a certain grim satisfaction that Wheeler had met justice of a sort, but also a hollow sadness for lives wasted in pursuit of greed. "Thank you for bringing the news," Quentin told the deputy. "Please tell Sheriff Davis we appreciate it." After the deputy left, Madeline and Quentin stood in silence on the porch, absorbing the implications of Wheeler's death. "It's over," Madeline said finally. "Truly over." "Yes," Quentin agreed, his arm still around her. "You're free now. Free to do whatever you choose." Something in his tone made her look up at him sharply. "What do you mean, just that?" "With Wheeler gone, there's nothing holding you here," Quentin said carefully. "If you wanted to go to California as you originally planned or back east." "Is that what you think I want?" Madeline asked, stepping away to face him directly. "To leave? I think I want you to stay," Quentin admitted, his voice low and intense. "More than I've wanted anything in a long time, but I won't hold you here out of obligation or gratitude." "Obligation." "Gratitude," Madeline repeated, incredulous. "Is that what you think this is, what I feel for you?" "I don't know what you feel," Quentin said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I only know that I've been falling in love with you since the day I found you by the side of the road, and I'm terrified of saying it out loud for fear you don't feel the same." The declaration hung in the air between them, as momentous as a thunderclap. Madeline felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "You love me," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "With all my heart," Quentin confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love your courage, your intelligence, your kindness. I love the way you approach everything with such determination, whether it's making perfect pastry or standing up to men like Wheeler. I love," Madeline closed the distance between them, pressing her fingers gently to his lips. "I love you too," she said simply. "I think I've loved you since you said I'll carry you and meant it in every way that matters." Joy broke across Quentin's face like sunrise. He pulled her into his arms, one hand cradling her cheek with infinite tenderness. "Madeline Porter," he murmured, "will you stay? Not as my employee or even just my business partner, but as my wife. Will you build a life here with me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be, and no one else I'd rather be with." When his lips finally met hers, it felt like coming home, like the culmination of a journey that had begun the moment she jumped from that stagecoach in Desperation. What had seemed like an ending had truly been a beginning. Madeline and Quentin were married on a crisp November day, with Sheriff Davis officiating and the entire ranch in attendance. Mrs. Winters cried openly, claiming dust in her eyes when Frank teased her about it. In the years that followed, Porter's Preserves grew into a thriving business, expanding to include a small shop in town managed by Madeline 3 days a week. The rest of her time was spent on the ranch, which flourished under their joint care. Children came first: a son with Quentin's green eyes and his mother's determined spirit, then twin daughters who kept everyone on their toes. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, but the porch where they'd first begun to fall in love remained Madeline and Quentin's special place. On warm evenings, long after the children were in bed, they would often sit there hand in hand, watching the stars emerge above their land. "Do you ever regret it?" Quentin asked once, on the 10th anniversary of the day they'd met. "Jumping from that stagecoach, not knowing where you'd end up." Madeline squeezed his hand, looking out over the ranch, their home, their legacy. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "It was the best leap of faith I ever took." "I'm glad I was there to catch you," Quentin replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "To carry me," Madeline corrected softly, leaning against his shoulder. "Until I could walk beside you." And in the gentle Arizona night, surrounded by the life they'd built together, they sat in peaceful contentment, two souls who had found in each other not just love, but partnership, respect, and the courage to face whatever came their way together.